I think one of the things that I think I need to prime people for, because in my previous essay, I had an essay called Consilience, as the unity of all knowledge. And I think that would kind of be a good moniker, if you will, of the top-down approach. I mean, in theory, yes, we should all kind of be going to that, but in practicality, how that actually works, in the real world and everything. But I think one of the key things in reading this is that you teased out very nicely, at least for me, and it struck me because I'd been into Consilience, I'd been kind of one of that, is that it's not really kind of about like the meta theories, and I don't want to say it's about like the relations, but it kind of like, let's just kind of unpack about like what it's not before we kind of go into like what it is, because I like, for me, I think when people kind of think of this, like the structures of consciousness, et cetera, you're going to kind of come away with like, okay, well, this is like a bunch of theories. And then now this is this meta theory that, and then through reading it, it seems like that is not what, he's saying, you're saying and stuff. And I just kind of want to pack that out before we get into like really what it is. So let's just say like what it isn't, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a theory of everything. It's not a synthesis. And you know what, the way Gebser writes too, he really, especially in the latter half of A Present Origin, really unpacks that. He kind of takes you through a deconstructive process of everything it's not. And so, it's not a grand theory. It's not a concept. For Gebser, this is more of, can you embody the different, again, that archaeology of consciousness in Gebser's theory, it's more of a phenomenology of consciousness. There's all of these different time-space expressions, ways of being in the world. You could even say ontologies, right?
Right.
But we're a multiplicity of those, and we live those in day to day. And so for Gebser, as much as it is of great intellectual work, studying all this stuff, it really is, how do we participate and live these different structures in day-to-day life as a culture, and then also use that multiplicity to kind of understand that we're sort of locked into a very particular orientation and relationship with time and with space that is very forward-oriented, higher and higher stages. There's a line that I love from Tim Morton where he says, the history of modernity, I'm paraphrasing him, is anything you can do, I can do meta. I mean, is that sense just of like, hey. Okay, well, there's a higher level here, and there's a higher, I can synthesize your synthesis. That's not what it is. Again, for Gebser, it's almost you almost see that as a kind of intellectual hernia, right? Or inflation. And that this is a symptomatic of a particular structure of consciousness that we have been running on since, early modernity. And so the idea is actually to kind of de-inflate that, get back down to earth, use the Latour language, to concretize in Gebser's language, and get familiar again in a felt embodied sense with these different lived ontologies that are part of us still. And because, part of his analysis of, let's say, fascism in Europe during between the two world wars was a study of how, having severed ourselves from place-based thinking, moved more into nationalism, there's a very unhealthy oscillation between total atomization and alienation from each other in the world, and then really unhealthy collectivization, right, through mass movements in Germany, et cetera. So he saw that as, underlying that is this crisis of consciousness, this particular structure of consciousness that's exhausted itself. So the theory is really an attempt to describe this whole unfolding history of consciousness as this dynamically living us, right? So, I don't know if that does it justice exactly, but it's really meant to be lived. It's really meant to be explored in a lived way.